In his heart he wished to look away. Not only did he want to avert his gaze, he wished to turn his back and run away. If that would not come to fruition, then he wanted to hold his head, cower, plug his ears, and reject everything. But he could not. He could not do that, as Wilhelm von Austria swung his sword. How could Heinkel Austria attempt to avert his gaze? As the aged body of the sword demon flourished with vigorous motion, he challenged the divine dragon that towered over him with a build several times his size. Evading the borderline of death many times, he delivered innumerable sword strikes that seemed to chip away at the dragon's scales. Encroach, leap, brandish, parry, posture maintenance, body weight transfer, vision guidance, applied technique, utilization of obstacles. The ultimate swordsman who made use of everything to elevate his swordsmanship. Beyond any shadow of doubt, Wilhelm, wielding his swords against the dragon, was the strongest swordsman Heinkel knew. For not even an instant could he take his eyes off that sword demon's exquisite performance, capturing his breath, forgetting to blink, to the point that even the beating of his heart felt as if it were a hindrance. He was enchanted by the numerous sword flashes. 'Twas nothing so elegant or polished as the likes of a sword dance. The nature of the sword demon who sought to cut deep into the lives of his opponents from whatever angle necessary was more uncouth, violence akin to a beast's instincts. The violence would be turned to drive, sublimated from drive to technique, finally arriving at the legend wearing against the divine dragon. In Wilhelm's figure, as he traded blows with the divine dragon, Heinkel caught glimpses of countless battlefields, of the Watergate city, of the figure crossing swords with the youthful form of Rezero von Austria, of the Lifflaus plains, of the figure swinging its sword against the mighty foe known as the White Whale, so that he could take revenge for his wife, of the commercial city, of the figure lopping off a mighty head of the three-headed blight dragon, dominating the skies, of the same commercial city, of the figure carving his name into history, as it clashed with the eight-arms Kurgan, strongest of the empire, of the royal Castle Lagunica, of the figure dispossessing Sword Saint Teresa von Austria of her sword, of the demi-human war, of the blood-stained figure sentencing numerous enemies to fodder for its blade, who would go on to be called the Sword Demon, of countless other battlefields, of the figure that had come to bring about victory through its sword as the greatest sword wielder. Heinkel perceived all in Wilhelm's current figure, and concurrently he understood, as things were proceeding, the divine dragon would be defeated. Heinkel, it's no good. Wringing those words out, Heinkel, who had fallen to his knees, stood up. As he stood, his hand to ascertain the presence of the sword carried at his waist, Heinkel was provoked by that conviction. The divine dragon would lose, after all. His opponent was the sword demon who had decided on victory. Alas, Heinkel's eyes could not perceive the upper limits of the sword demon's and the divine dragon's strength. Just as how those who stood upon the ground could not be sure of the scenery present above the clouds, even supposing there had unfolded a scenery beyond their wildest imaginations, they would never get to lay their eyes upon it. Hence there was no other choice but to put his shoddy imagination to work and envision it. Thus, in the world conjured by Heinkel Astria's meager imagination, the divine dragon would succumb to the blade of the sword demon. Considering the preconditions, the divine dragon had been at an overwhelming advantage going into the fight. Even as Heinkel saw it, the sword demon's blades pierced not the divine dragon's scales, and even after many attempted assaults, a decisive blow had yet to be delivered. Conversely, each and every one of the Divine Dragon's attacks were lethal, such that even a graze a few millimeters deep would rob the sword demon of his life, scattering his corpse to the battlefield. Heinkel understood those preconditions. Even so, his vision of the sword demon winning went unshaken. There was no logic to it. Logic and reason were not things that could surpass the Sword Saint. That was to say, the strength of the sword demon who had once bested the Sword Saint went beyond logic and reason. The strength to deliver the tip of his sword to that beyond resided within the sword demon. And so, Heinkel, it's no good. That indisputable worst-case scenario was unacceptable for Heinkel's course. Were he to triumph over the Divine Dragon here, the Sword Demon would likely move to challenge the Sword Saint next. Then, just as he had bested the previous generation Sword Saint, he would triumph over the current generation Sword Saint. Was no good. That alone was no good. There were many obstacles in the way of realizing such a battle, such as the presence of the Witch of Envy that Elbram was utilizing through some method. But even without such elements, it was no good. It was no good at all, no good. So, because it was no good, it was absolutely no good. As to why it was no good, the extent of which it was no good, warranted no need for explanation. Anyway, it was no good was no good, and no good was all that could be no good. It was no good at all. That which was no good would be no good. So it was no good at all. The perfectly pure blade of the sword demon could not save Luna Estrella. It could not save her. That was why. To his fore present was the back of the sword demon standing still. A muffled voice from across the back, muffled by the froth of blood. That which sounded as if it were nearly drowning. He had not to convey to Heinkel that his own name had been called. Having perceived that whilst exerting his fullest restraint to suppress his trembling arms, he gripped the sword's hilt tight. With your way of doing things, I can't get back Luna. Struck in the forehead by a fragment of a collapsing building, blood had been flowing. Blown away many times by the blasting shockwaves, he had also found himself getting trapped under a collapsing pillar, with half his body also scorched by the aftermath of the dragon's breath that had been slicing apart by a sword's flash. He forced himself through the agony of burning bone, blood and flesh, still continuing to walk. His body soiled to the utmost extent. By dust clouds and shed blood, he walked and walked and walked. Heinkel stood behind Wilhelm, standing there with Estrella drawn. He skewered his biological father from behind. Wilhelm, through the piercing sword, he felt Wilhelm attempt to turn around in order to forestall that moment. He poured strength into his grip, the flaring of the deep wound thwarting all thought of turning around. At that moment, he could not glimpse Wilhelm's face. Were he to see his own self reflected in those eyes, the Heinkel of both past and present would be rendered incapable of speech. That was why he could not let him turn around, no matter what. He could not afford to let him turn around, to let him say it. If the sword demon was permitted such being allowed to say that, he would carry it out. He would end up prying it open with his sword. In that opened up future, perhaps all the dark clouds could be cleared away, and a patch of the long, clouded blue sky would be glimpsed. But Laona's figure would not be present then. Through the blade of the sword demon, Laona could not awaken. And if she was not present, then Heinkel and one other would be beyond salvation. I am not you. I am not you, Dad. I'm me. This is something I have to do. No matter what. That which has been wrung out, he wished to curse the fact that he had been a feeble voice tinged with sobs, gritting his teeth, good for nothing. Put strength in his voice, coward. Do you really have time to hang your head, craven? Even with his hands, this sword stained with father's blood, you can't even stifle the roots of your teeth quivering. The sensation of heat in your eyes, the feeling of all your insides crawling like worms, making you want to just spill everything out, you parasite. Bragging about how you've settled your resolve. Since when have you ever been able to fool your wavering self, you pant-wetter? You utter moron. With unceasing curses, Heinkel negatively spurred himself onward. To Heinkel's ears was delivered a reprimand not of his own, yet one that could only have been in agreement with him. The voice had not been drowning in blood, and after his cheeks tensed at that fact, Heinkel gazed in amazement. To his fore, he locked eyes with Wilhelm, whom he had been attempting to prevent from turning around. Looking at his hands, the sword was in the same position. Nevertheless, the reason Wilhelm had been able to turn around was because he was twisting his body, forcibly removing himself from the sword, piercing his torso. Naturally, blood would flow once the sword was removed from a wound. And if it had been forced out, the wound would have expanded. But the sword demon had removed the blade itself. After all, had he not done so, you would not have been able to turn around. Heinkel. Leaving Heinkel speechless with that outrageous deed, Wilhelm called out to him again. His throat clogged up. Wilhelm gulped down the rising blood, ensuring his voice would be unclouded. However, he had sustained wounds across his body from his duels with Yai and the divine dragon, so having also received a deep wound from Heinkel, his body was already losing a fatal amount of blood. Sure enough, having lost the support of the sword piercing his body, Wilhelm's knees collapsed. Dad. In the spur of the moment, Heinkel reached out his hand to prop up the collapsing body. But to the contrary, Heinkel's outstretched hand was grasped, unexpectedly pulling him close. As Heinkel's cheeks stiffened at the physical strength unthinkable for one who had lost so much blood on the verge of death, Wilhelm regarded him with eyes from which strength would by no means fade. Enough. Wake up, Heinkel. At those words, a dusky heat was lit within the cowering Heinkel's heart. Was he really going to lecture him to stop dreaming, the pipe dream of awakening Lona? If that were to come true, would Luna be glad? Even without needing to say it, he knew there was no way Lona would be glad. Not for a single one of the things Heinkel had done until today would Luna approve of. She would scorn him, fall out of love with him, have her affection for him flipped to loathing. Heinkel's name would not avoid being engraved into Lona as the most repulsive man in the world. But that would be fine. Anger, loathing, scorn, all of it was fine if it meant that Lona would awake from her slumber. That her blue eyes would reflect the world once more. That her lips would celebrate life. That would be fine. The likes of a convenient dream he saw not. In this reality that was so nightmarish, yet ultimately not a nightmare, Heinkel would live and die for that purpose. Wilhelm, incorrect. His dusky resolve had returned alongside the pain in his head. However, Wilhelm had put the brakes on that. There did Heinkel's breath catch, staring at Wilhelm in bewilderment, without averting his gaze from his incompetent son. Wilhelm moved his blood-stained lips. The expression on his face was one Heinkel recalled, an unpleasant memory of past times. the sorrowful expression Wenhelm had worn in delivering the news that his mother, had not returned from the battle against the White Well. Wenhelm, wake up, Heinkel, you! With a face that, as soon as Heinkel knew, the sword demon Wenhelm had only sworn the time he had displayed his utmost weakness. Wenhelm, you, no matter whose hatred you incur, Reinhard will never abandon the seat of Sword Saint. Just as soon as it had been back then, the words uttered that had wounded Heinkel's heart to the utmost.